Hello, and you are back in the Velvet Room with Jokerthefool. This is our 73rd episode, and today we'll be discussing the warhawks' plan the escalation, and activists could be in trouble. So we're going to get right into this episode with a headline from Evolve News, and the headline reads, Biden allowed Iran's missile sanctions to expire before attack on Israel. So if you don't know, Iran launched a missile attack against Israel. Islamic Republic of Iran fired more than 300 missiles at Israel during the attack. The assault was in retaliation for a strike on its embassy in Syria last week that killed 7 IRGC terrorists. Iran claims Israel was behind the attack, but the Jewish state has not claimed responsibility, and the initial sanctions against Iran expired on the 18th of October in 2023, and that expiration date came from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Again, this was done by Obama, and of course you got Biden in office right now. So I do think what this is just a continuation of the war hawk agenda. And again, this isn't a Democrat Republican thing. This is a uniparty thing. Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, all these big, the military-industrial complex is called an industrial complex because of the amount of money that it makes. So you've got this huge financial incentive for these countries to be bombing each other as much as possible. So I do think this escalation was planned to let the sanctions go in tandem with when these sorts of things would happen. Maybe you had the October 7th attack being a happy little coincidence for the war hawks. And again, when I say happy, that you have people dying, losing their homes, women and children getting abducted and raped. These are good things for the war hawks because they get to use these as headlines as fodder to use people as fodder. And of course, you get to sell bullets and body bags and missiles and all the things that war needs. War is great for the economy, and the economic incentive to go to war, to maintain a state of war, is so great that it is something that will be planned out. So to have this, these missile sanctions expire, I do think is something that was explicitly a planned thing. And of course, the whole concept of political capital, you can only get a deal in place if, certain things that you don't want to engage with for too long, like sanctions, expire, yada, yada, yada. I definitely think, though, that these deals and negotiations and contracts and whatever the hell you want to call them, are negotiated from the perspective of how can we have the most amount of escalation while still maintaining enough of a state of peace where we can have bread and circuses, and we're not getting the general populations of the countries, like the U.S., the Western world, the countries that are generally safe from this, to not be so riled up and have this huge anti-war movement and this real pushback against the war hawks, so much so that they just have to pull out and stop this. Now, of course, there's the other aspect of the war hawk agenda is that to maintain a state of war like this, you need to have a good standing military, and the American military definitely is not in that position with the way the recruitment rate is, with even the fact that you've got people in the standing army who aren't doing as well as they need to be doing physically. So you've got morale as low as possible amongst the people who could volunteer to join. You've got the fact that if you tried pulling a draft, it would be an absolute disaster. And the fact that even if you did start drafting people, so many people in this country are so unhealthy that they couldn't fight on the front line. So, that's why they want to do drones and robots and all these sorts of things. And also, the more stuff you manufacture, someone's got to manufacture it, and that means someone's making money off of it. So there's a huge financial incentive with this, so much so that they will have no amount of human suffering and death and destruction and everything. That is not an obstacle to making money for these people. These are true freaking psychopaths that we are dealing with. They are, like Alex Jones would say, satanic pedophiles, but it's not far off. These are satanic, bloodthirsty pedophiles. You can go into the adrenochrome stuff. But these are the sort of people that get behind closed doors and make these sort of decisions, and they want to degrade human society and civilization as much as possible to a point where they can have it be in a state where they can pull as much resources as possible while it's still standing. So it's like a really fucked up game of Jenga that they're playing, basically. And I do think this story that, the Biden allowed the Iran's missile sanctions to expire before the attack on Israel is very much indicative of that. But we're going to go into the second topic here. The Supreme Court deals huge blow to BLM. This headline is coming from News Addict. And on Monday, the U.S. Supreme Court made a ruling that permits the progression of a lawsuit against a Black Lives Matter activist, which was filed by a Louisiana police officer injured during an incident in 2016. So again, this was basically 8 years ago, and now it's gone through the court system, been struck down by the Supreme Court. Anything in the legal system takes a ridiculously long amount of time. On Tuesday's episode, I talked about MI5 being sued and how it takes a long time for these lawsuits to be resolved. So, it's something like that lawsuit that, is recently going to go through and get processed. It could be like, 2032 when we get a resolution on something like that. For what happened recently. This is an incident that happened in 2016. It just got all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said we won't hear it, so the lower court's decision stands. And this particular case has the potential to create obstacles for violent protesters seeking to evade accountability for causing harm to law enforcement. Obstacles. So DeRay McKenson's appeal, the justices, there's a Supreme Court justice left in place, a lower court's decision reviving a lawsuit by the Baton Rouge officer John Ford, who accused him of negligence after being struck by a rock during a protest sparked by the fatal police shooting of a black man, Alton Sterling. Sorry if I mumbled through that, but basically you had a protest in which that McKenson's right to having done what he did to police officer was a First Amendment thing. This was shot down by the Fifth U.S. Court of Appeals, based in New Orleans. They tried to get this to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court is saying, no, this wasn't a First Amendment thing. This was, you're committing an act of violence against this person. You're not protected under the First Amendment. That's not a protected protest by the state. And again, this does set up legal precedents for but this is setting up legal precedents to say when something like this happens again, saying, hey, you can't enact violence against the police and have that be legitimate protest. We're throwing the book at you. Now, again, whether these people end up getting the book thrown at them is a whole other matter entirely. A lot of these protests happen in the big urban areas. Think, New York City, Los Angeles, Detroit, and a lot of these places they're Democrat strongholds, they're blue states. You have this cashless bail, the soft on crime policies, and the fact that the people who do these protests, they have the ACAP mindset, the all cops are bad mindset. So they're going to lie, cheat, and steal around the police. They're going to cover their faces. They're going to do anything to avoid getting arrested, which is why the left-wing violent activists often win compared to the right-wing activists. Like, you had the Proud Boys getting in the spat with Antifa in New York City all the time ago. Antifa ran away. They ran from the cops. Proud Boys, they worked with the police, and that's why they had these court cases against them. And Antifa in that situation did not. And I do think that's going to be something that happens, and this is like sort of like a bone being thrown at the people who go law and order, and that's what they want to see is law and order. They want peace. They want these urban centers to not be criminal infested hellholes, but that's what the that's what the elites want, because it just encourages more societal breakdown, of course. But that's my main argument, is that this is definitely bad for activists. It sets legal precedents that using these violent means against law enforcement isn't protected under the First Amendment, and it honestly shouldn't be. If you're aggressing upon someone, that's not a you're violating someone's property rights, even if they are an agent of the state, which the police are. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I'm not a big fan of the police, but police officers still have their own property rights, so you don't have the right to aggress upon a police officer, even if they are doing something you disagree with, because a lot of police officers, they just have it's just a job. They're just doing their job. They're not the they're not the people who are running the machine. They're just cogs in it. And that's the perspective that I personally have. So it's more or less fixing the system. It's more or less reforming peacekeeping as an institution, privatizing it rather than, saying ACAB and, being mad at the police. So that's my perspective on it personally, and I do think that this is more or less a bone being thrown, like I said, that a lot of these protests happen in the blue states, in the Democratic strongholds, where you have cashless bail, these soft on crime policies, which will allow a lot of these people to get free anyway if they get caught. And you have the fact that these activists are extremely belligerent to police. They aren't going to work with police. They're going to run away with them. They're going to do anything they can to get away from them. And then you've got the fact that a lot of these police departments are going to say, hey, stand down, don't do anything, don't go in there while the protests are happening, and they'll just let them happen, let them wreak their havoc and move on. That's the way the state's been operating in these sorts of places. So again, it's a real mixed bag on what the end results of this are going to be. But for the activists that do get caught, that did use violent means, they have even less of a legal ground to stand on by saying, First Amendment, because that's been shot down. And lawyers, on the prosecution can point to this court case and say, hey, what you did was not protected under First Amendment because, DeRay McKenzie tried to push that, and that got shot down. Went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court refused to hear it. So that means the Supreme Court said, we're not hearing this. That's basically whatever the last court's decision is the settled matter on that case. So that's what that means. So if the Supreme Court refuses to hear something, whatever lawsuit was, whatever decision was made in the prior court stands, and that's the way it works for the legal system. So you could have like that, first to court, and then you go up to the next one, and the next one could deny it. But once you go all the way up to the Supreme Court, there's no one to go to. You can't resubmit the same case to the Supreme Court, as far as I know. Not a lawyer, but I think with that, I've spieled on as much as I can. This has been a really rapid-fire episode. I did mumble a little bit, but hopefully you were engaged, you listened to this, and thank you. And we're going into the outro now. Thank you for being in the Velvet Room with Joker the Fool. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, whether you're listening on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, or Substack. And be sure to subscribe to my Substack, velvetroompublishing.substack.com, to keep up with Machine to Man and all my other projects.